Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Julie Lilly, and today's session involving education, co-creating just cultures of peace. And before we jump into anything, I'd like to pause and just honor that I am on the traditional lands of the Akil Aldom in Phoenix area in Arizona. And let's just take a moment, kind of consider where you are at and honor and respecting the many indigenous peoples who still care for our lands and are original caretakers of our lands. So I'd like to thank Arizona State for providing some organizational support. And again, my name is Julie Lilly, and I am the founder of the Peace Pad. And the Peace Pad is all about creating peaceful people, peaceful projects. I'm an author, which you're going to hear about my book today, as well as work in schools with seniors, doing learning experience, video production, working in different community settings, all related to peace education. And we'll go deep into that here in our session today. So thank you for joining. I mostly will be a little bit in the chat. And so if you have questions as we go, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if I know I'm going to answer them, I won't answer them maybe immediately, but I'll get to those while we're together. So let's think about why we're here. Kind of our big problem is that humanity is struggling to live at peace within ourselves, with each other, and with our planet. And the 2024 Global Peace Index shows that there are 56 active conflicts across 97 countries that have deteriorated in peacefulness. And this trend, downward detrimental trend, has continued for now the 5th consecutive year. And the Global Peace Index was created in 2008, and this is actually the lowest level recorded since the end of World War II. So we know that there are a lot of challenges with war, violent conflict, and as well as the economic impacts. It's estimated that in 2023, the impact of violence cost the global economy $19.1 trillion, let alone the impact on humanity and our planet. And then we think about in elementary and secondary schools that we see this problem of violence, bullying, cyberbullying, fighting, weapons, gang use, sexual violence, emotional abuse, and harassment in a lot of our school settings. And I've been an educator for over 16 years, working from pre-K through college and coaching adults in mostly urban settings. And, it's become even increasingly alarming, the amount of students who are affected by trauma and violence. According to international surveys, UNESCO estimates that 1 in 3 children experience bullying almost every day. So, just in this space, at least 2 of us have. I know I did as a child. Similarly, in the United States, the School Superintendents Association estimates that 38% of school districts have experienced a lot of real moderate to extreme forms of cultural divisiveness and violence and threats of violence. So we have, a lot of prevalence of our school of violence and bullying. And of course, that has an impact on concentration in class, avoidance of school activities, a lack of a sense of belonging, and that affects achievement and whether we stay in school as well. And we also know that there are a lot of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual disease related to anxieties and fears and apathy. And even around the world, it's estimated that 1 in 7 children from age 10 to 19 are affected by mental health conditions. And in the United States, that number is 1 in 6 children and 1 in 5 adults. So the problem is very clear. And of course, I think you're here today to look for how can we address these problems? The United Nations put forth 17 sustainable development goals. And as we go, I'm going to mention different resources, and I'll just be dropping them in the chat so that you have access to these links. And then I'll also follow up in an email so you have them there. So don't feel like you have to click out if you don't want to. So going to the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They outline the very, very urgent need for global partnership, for actions that are going to improve human life and protect our environment. Yet until as of 2024, we have only met about 17% are on track for being achieved. About 50% have shown minimal or moderate progress, and 33% have actually stalled or regressed. So these goals, as I think when we look at them, can agree are of the utmost importance to humanity, and yet we are not meeting them, and we are actually regressing in them. So what can we do from here? So I am also a partner with an organization called Education for Global Peace. And I'm co-leading a project with the director, Gal Kleinman, and a fantastic group of people who are involved in peace building efforts related to schools and adults. And what we believe is that if we are to change these trends towards living in sustainable peace worldwide, that education is the foundation. We believe that one of the most important endeavors of our time is to transform the way that we view and practice education. And we want to transfer that to one that is based on peace and justice education. Our young people are wanting and needing, and our future generations, to have the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, and the beliefs that are going to build and sustain peace within ourselves, with others, and within our environments. So education is really our opportunity and our method in which we can establish peace. And this message is echoed in UNESCO, who put out revised 2023 recommendations on educating for peace and human rights and sustainable development. And that is a fantastic document with lots of definitions and guiding principles and different ways that learning objectives can be built into curriculum and activities, with that same goal of building a more peaceful, just, and sustainable society, and that starts with education. We can do that also in conjunction with the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which UNESCO put forward, that children and youth are to be brought up in the spirit of peace, dignity, tolerance, freedom, equality, and solidarity, which means that this can happen and should be happening in our educational spaces, both formal and informal, because that's other than our family and home environments, that's what shapes our perspectives and our behaviors. Now, I also want to echo visionary Dr. Maria Montessori. I had the pleasure of working in a Montessori school for many years. And she said that establishing lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. And that preventing war is the work of politicians, yet establishing peace is the work of educationists. So if we are to transform the violence, the conflict, the war, oppression, all of these injustices that are before us, learners have to become and be empowered to be agents of justice and peace in their communities. And that's why we are calling on the mainstreaming of peace education worldwide to help us realize the sustainable development goals and ultimately live in a more sustainable, resilient peace with each other and with our environment. So how do we do this? You know, there's a lot of different methods, different opportunities and ways. And what I'd like to share is what I've called the peace action framework. And the 5 peace actions, we're gonna go deep into them here shortly, but they're: seek peace within yourself and others, reach out in service, protect our environment, respect diversity, be a responsible citizen of the world. And these 5 peace actions were created by an organization based out of Minnesota called World Citizen Peace. And I was introduced to World Citizen Peace and the 5 peace actions through my colleague, Dr. Carrie Seeley Dierzak, who is the co-author of my book that I'll be sharing. And when Carrie was a principal and we were both literacy coaches and working with adults, she was leading her school in becoming an international peace site. This is in becoming an international peace site is not just reserved for schools. It could be churches and libraries and public spaces. But a peace site declares that we are going to live out the 5 peace actions and seek to align to that. And these 5 peace actions, I just felt so connected and like this is the language so succinctly put for how to create a just and peaceful world. And in my past as an educator and my upbringing, I've had intersections with these peace actions, and so having them just kind of presented in front of me through my colleague Carrie was fantastic, and provided an opportunity for us to say, okay, so how do we take these peace actions and really bring them into life in a school setting? And Carrie was looking for different curriculum and lessons and resources and asked for my help in this area. And we dug and we read lots of different books and considered what our options were. But ultimately, we realized, there's not a lot available that's more current and engaging and comprehensive, especially for the area we were focusing, which was elementary education. So we decided to go forth and as Toni Morrison says, if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So we wrote Empowering Peace and Justice Education, an actionable framework for elementary educators and learners. And this book, though geared towards elementary educators and learners, it's really much more open to that. So I'd really recommend it for all ages, all stages, because we focus on multiple lenses of identity, from the adult and your relationship with the 5 peace actions and with what peace education is and the impacts in your community, as well as then how do we put this into practice. And we provide guidance for putting into practice in emerging, intermediate, and advanced. And even though, again, it's titled for elementary, the advanced pieces are things I do with adults all the time in my consulting work. So very much in alignment. So what I'm going to outline here is definitely a lot of things connected to our book, but generally you don't have to buy the book to implement peace education and think about how you can live and work with these 5 peace actions. So we define peace education as both a philosophy and a process of learning that creates a world in which all people live in harmony with oneself, each other, and the environment. So peace education is really this deep and transformational process. It's about living, not just doing though, also about being, and being able to enact just cultures of peace globally requires that we also are learning and respecting diversity and seeking out different viewpoints. So in order to sustain and create, in some cases, peace, we have to make sure that we are establishing and promoting the attitudes, the beliefs, the values, the knowledge, and the skills that are going to build towards that. So that includes developing and deepening an understanding of our interconnectedness as a planet, as a people, a little of human consciousness, even with our youngest learners, really nurturing the well-being of all life. Along with this, peace education is about embracing the power of nonviolence. And this can happen in so many different ways, but it's a way also that we can become empowered with critical thinking and problem solving through this lens of compassion and hope. And on my website, and I'll be dropping again links in the chat and sending these out later, but I have more information about kind of the what and why of peace education. So if you're sharing it with others or kind of new to this, there's more resources there as well as this presentation. So we really, in our book and in my work, really talk about peace learning. And there is no space there. I'm going to give a nod to Ian Harris and Mary Lee Morrison, who wrote the 3rd edition of Peace Education, who introduced me to this term. And it's really, I find it's just such a powerful word that shows that compound nature of how learning and peace are interconnected, and that peace cannot be separate from learning. They have to be joined together. And there are many tenets of peace learning, exploring your personal identity beliefs and then how that intersects with relationships and with your work in the community. A lot of times, I think in the past, there was a pretty narrow view of peace education as more around conflict management. And that is a part of peace education. But as you're hearing, that is just one peace action, seeking peace with others. And we can even move that a little further into transformative practices like peace circles, which we have some free lesson plans and resources on my website that I'll share with you. So as part of this peace learning and pursuits of peace, we want to really think about how we're co-creating brave spaces. And a brave space allows for all identities to be honored, that we're approaching things in a developmentally sensitive ways. But even with our youngest kids, that we're exploring harm, injustice, structural violence, systemic oppression, and what are these peaceful alternatives and solutions, many that exist and many that our young people can bring forward. One of the most beautiful parts of peace education is also that we can really be inspired by peacemakers of the past and the present. And that doesn't need to be only just like Nelson Mandela or, you know, kind of the names we might think of, Martin Luther King Jr. But there's people in our communities, everyday peacemakers. And when we connect with those 5 peace actions, we can really highlight that. And peace learning also creates a sense of hope. And I think that's something we could all use a little bit more of, especially our young people who some don't have a lot of hope for their future, for the future of our planet, for others. So if we wonder and we support learners in wondering about the current states of life, having a flexible mindset, how do we create a vision that provides a just future for everyone? To me, what could be more important in how we are thinking about what is the purpose and role of schooling? You know, we're pretty stuck in an industrial era of education, and though there are shifts happening, we can see that there's so much more that education can offer about living and being within ourselves, with others, and our environment. And this is grounded in a social justice approach, provides also some, if you approach it from a decolonized viewpoint where we're really bringing in Indigenous worldviews and knowledge, especially around caring for life and our environment. And ultimately, as peace educators, we are working towards positive peace. And positive peace, and there's negative peace, which is like the absence of violence. So as long as you don't do something, I won't react violently. But it's not always just, it's not always sustainable. And what we really want to work towards, which is the goal of peace education, is towards positive peace, which is about prevention, about being proactive. Ultimately, it's more systematic and systemic in how it's approached. So I want to offer our book framework as a further way to kind of contextualize this of how do we evolve schools. We can utilize these 5 peace actions. I like to split sometimes seek peace within yourself and seek peace with others because there's a lot within there. But we can use these 5 peace actions and especially anchoring to language and literacy and storytelling. But there are opportunities across all content areas for us to start shifting our practice as educators to a more holistic whole person view that includes engagement with our families and communities, that leadership is a part of this. And some schools might choose to, we're going to really focus on creating cultures of peace in our school. And you can take that even a step further and become an international peace site. Again, we're one of the pathways that World Citizen provides and that we outline also in our book. So there's no shortage of opportunity. And the approach that I think is really important, though, is that we encircle all of this with trauma-informed care. And I'll talk a little bit more about these topics in a few moments. And culturally relevant pedagogy. And above all else, if our young people and as adults, if we do not feel empowered, if we do not have a sense of hope, my goodness, we aren't happy. We don't feel like our impact matters. So that is what we really emphasize in peace education. So a lot of different ways, again, to do this, but I want to emphasize also that given our socio-political context right now and before, after here, that we also have to think about a lot of obstacles and challenges. And we dedicate a whole chapter to really exploring these obstacles and challenges because we know we live them as educators, as well as some things that we can predict. So as peace and justice educators, it's super important that we have kind of some preparation of how are we going to handle pushback, accusations of indoctrination and things like that are so far out the scope of peace education, yet through misinformation, often these words can kind of come forward. So let's just think, and I'm going to invite you to add in the chat if you make any connections in your life, in your work to these peace actions. So the first peace action is seek peace within yourself. So again, there's a lot of different ways that in our own life, in our school, with kids, that we can explore this. And I like to really go deep in self-awareness processes, emotional regulation, creative intelligence, really getting out of dualistic thinking, this either or thinking, and being able to see the world as the both and, that, sometimes two contradictory things or experiences can both be true at the same time. And having that dynamic, more flexible thinking are some of those pursuits that we want for students. And we outline these pursuits. If you're familiar in like educational context, we usually have learning targets or learning goals, benchmarks. We have peace pursuits, and these peace pursuits are, written similarly to a learning objective, but are related to these 5 peace actions. So topics around happiness and hope and really around self-regulation is a big core part of seeking peace within yourself. So I invite you to drop in the chat, like when you think about what does that inner peace, that seek peace within yourself, what topics or ideas or connections do you make to it? I'll just give you a moment to drop that in. We'll keep moving through all of them, so feel free to kind of add your
Julie,
ideas as we go.
Julie, just a question. Are
Yeah.
you are you asking for the feeling of peace within or the how to achieve peace within, or both?
Whatever you are called to share. Thank you for clarifying that. So it could be like, here's what I think about when I think about seek peace within, or it might be more of like, here are topics or areas I think that are important in that peace action. So just say if there's anything that comes up that I haven't kind of captured, just so we can harvest a little bit of our collective genius as well. Thanks, Michelle. Connection, mindful breathing. Beautiful. So we'll keep kind of similarly going through each piece action and just invite you to drop your ideas there. So seeking peace within others. So here we get kind of into the more traditional view of peace education as conflict management or conflict transformation. But what else does that peace action mean to you? Seeking peace within others. How do you seek peace with others? What's important underneath that? What skills are needed to seek peace within others? And we explore a lot of areas around, from loneliness and a sense of belonging to social connection, um, having empathy and compassion. But then we really need to think about what are the roots of conflict. And often scarcity and competition in its different forms can create a lot of conflict. There's a lot of different approaches to conflict and peace. And so understanding how do I usually approach conflict? What are different ways I can approach a conflict? Because conflicts are inevitable, but how we handle them can be really an opportunity for us to learn, for us to, I like the word you added, reciprocity, to reconnect. Yeah, supporting each other in their community, whether it's in times of need, times of joy. Beautiful. Seeking peace within others, a lot of skills and values related to cooperation and collaboration can come through here. All right, let's think about respecting diversity. So as we've seen in the news, diversity, equity, and inclusion has certainly been under attack. And what are we talking about here? We're talking often about human rights, about having equity. There's a lot of different language in which we can frame and have terminology related to this, but ultimately we view diversity as an asset, as a strength, and why not want to seek out multiple perspectives and ideas and have diverse understandings, have diverse experiences, be exposed to diverse cultures and viewpoints and genders. So all of these is interwoven with what is our epistemology, our views, our experiences, our knowledge, and how that comes together to shape our epistemology. And in our book, we really focus on respect diversity as culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching and kind of that in that area. And we propose actually even moving further into culturally affirming systems. So there's a lot in education. Geneva Gay, Gloria Latson-Billings, Dr. Goldie Mohammed. So there's a lot of different folks in this field who we can draw upon their knowledge and bring that together with peace education pursuits. And I'll give a little nod to Dr. Goldie Mohammed, who actually uses the term pursuits in her work, which we were really inspired by to utilize it as a framing for peace pursuits. So I invite you back to the chat. When you think about respect diversity, what does that mean to you? What skills, what does it mean to put that in place? What prevents it from happening in certain spaces? Anything that's coming up for you about respect diversity? Yeah, being non-judgmental, being curious, great attributes. When you think about, certainly there's curiosity and wonder is fostered in many school settings, but it starts to fade a little bit more as we get with more secondary youth, which is such a shame. But that in relationship is so important as well. Hmm. Yeah, Jackson. Learning, reading stories about different cultures. Yeah, we follow some of the work around windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, reading Bishop Sims and thinking about our curriculum and how that can both show our reflection, but we also want to see others through that. And we want it to go both ways. So we want to be able to have it both ways. And an Indigenous author also introduced the idea of curtains, being that sometimes curtains need to be drawn, for example, in some Indigenous spiritual practices that were being co-opted by white Westerners. So this same idea within respect diversity, that we can learn from others and see ourselves also reflected in that. All right, let's go to protect our environment. So this peace action, when World Citizen Peace wrote it, they wrote it as protect the environment. And we actually made a change in our book to protect our environment for a really a specific reason, which is that reciprocity, Michelle, that you mentioned earlier, is so important with our environment. And I had an amazing mentor and teacher, Ida Downwind Bald Eagle, who really helped me deepen my understanding of the interconnectedness with our environment, and exploring more Indigenous worldviews and knowledges. And so in our book, we really focus on that. And I really propose, again, beyond the book, just working with these peace actions as a framework for evolving education. We can learn so much from Indigenous worldviews about who is all life and how do we consider life. Is rock life? Does it have to be a human? Where is that animacy? And then, of course, protecting our environment involves a lot of our planetary concerns and being both knowledgeable about those, but again, being empowered as an agent of change, that as an agentic learner, you can take action, and that we can put that in community context, not just within the classroom space. And that can be things like sustainability practices in the community, green teams. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But go ahead, why don't you add to the chat when you think about protect our environment? What topics, ideas do you connect with? What does that make you think about that peace action, protect our environment? I know for me, I just love being outside and having opportunity to be in nature. Yeah, Jackson too. And think about how our schools often look. Many of them are designed by the same people who designed prisons back in the 70s. And we can see that. And so how, just even going to our infrastructure, how are our classrooms and our learners, what are the spaces that they're in? Do they have access to green space? Is there ability to have a garden? Yeah, like what Michelle is adding, like being intentional, like what can I do to take little action on picking up trash? Something that when I would take our green team outside to in our environment, they would love to do that, glove them up, and the kids were like, "We've got everything, we're cleaning it up," because it again it empowered them, and then they were able to see like, hey, if somebody threw trash down again, like, hey, this is our space. We wanted to keep it clean. So yeah, that really does make a big, great difference. All right, reaching out in service. So, like that example is also we can protect our environment and reach out in service. And reaching out in service, I'd like you to just think about what gives you joy. What makes you kind of feel that feeling of that felt good, that I was able to take action or to help someone else or to be in service to others. And we want our young people to have those opportunities and not just like, once a year so I can put it on my future resume, but like true meaningful service learning, project-based learning, really being able to be in the community and to see that, hey, there's an injustice or there's a problem or there's just something that I want to lift up and enhance, that they can take meaningful action or peace action towards that. So if you'd like to add, like if you were to reach out in service, or maybe you have in the past, or what would bring you joy or allow you to feel that sense of compassion for yourself and others. When we reach out in service too, and this is something that yeah, Michelle, we're an educator, right? Every day. I absolutely agree. And we want to think about too, often that our schools are spaces for the community to gather or become like if there's a natural disaster that we have a focal point of educators. So reaching out in service, there's a lot of considerations also for, how to both not come in and do, but to like work with the folks that are impacted and allow their voices and their healing to be at the forefront. And then our last piece action, be a responsible citizen of the world. So here I think again is like where we can anchor a lot of stories and storytelling. And I think you're hopefully starting to see how these peace actions are also so interconnected. We want to really kind of look at this individualism versus kind of ideas of collectivism and pluralism and move into this global citizenship, this community, both locally and globally, or G-localized learning that would allow us to really move out of this us versus them divisiveness that we certainly see in many of our communities, especially around the United States. So the sustainable development goals, learners interacting with those goals. And in our book, we have practices for all of these different topics. So how do we put this into practice? But it also starts with us as educators and adults and parents, that we really grapple with these peace actions and think about how do they already intersect with our life, as well as how can we deepen our connection and alignment and implementation in our lives. So I'm just going to highlight super quick in our book too, and I think this goes back to, again, being able to respect diversity and thinking about that global view. But we have some awesome peacemakers in practice who contributed essays, and they really like lifted up the book and provided a further depth. So super excited and thankful for all of their contributions. All right, so let's go back a little bit into those peace education and thinking about what we can do in our lives and our classrooms. And I mentioned respect diversity is where we really explore culturally relevant pedagogy in our book, but in general, peace and justice education and culturally relevant pedagogy have a lot of intersections. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who we kind of call the grandmother of culturally relevant pedagogy, she talked about that culturally relevant pedagogy needed students having academic success, students developing and maintaining cultural competence. So that's kind of that respect diversity in general. And then students developing a critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo. And I think that that critical consciousness and challenging the status quo, this current social order, is something that often, in some spaces, there'll be accusations that, oh, peace education is some form of indoctrination, which, you know, the definition, it is quite the opposite of that, because peace education is about the freedom to learn, the freedom to lean into that curiosity and inquiry and wonder. Michelle, what you said about practicing non-judgment, exploring different viewpoints. Ultimately, learners are constructing their own understanding. And one of those peace pursuits that I think is probably the most important one is that that understanding is viewed as flexible. That when I get new information, hear different perspectives, as I learn and grow, my ideas of myself, of others, of the world, that might change as well. You know, having that flexibility in our thinking, I think, is one of those most important pursuits that also creates more inclusivity and honors and values human rights. So I think it's a real challenge ahead of us of maintaining this freedom to learn. I myself, even here in the state of Arizona, had been censored from a conference through the state of Arizona when there was a change in office, and I was presenting on peace education in these 5 peace actions, and people who were presenting on diversity, teacher wellness and well-being, we were all censored out of an educational conference. So it is something that is a real concern and a real need to also take peace action against those injustices and remain active and alert to that. Well, we're also really engaging, especially when we engage our families and communities and really explore, what are these peace actions? How do they show up? How does our language reflect it? Our practices reflect it? Often, most parents and caregivers are unlikely to say, I don't want my kids to be kind. Of course they do. They want their kids to be happy and be empowered and have kindness shown and shared to them. So when we really get down to that, that freedom to learn, those are our rights for our students. And one way that we can really ensure that that freedom to learn is there for all students is through co-creating brave spaces. And the way that I approach the brave spaces is informed by Britt Hawthorne's work and Dadir Sylvan, but it's really about this differentiation between a safe space and a brave space. And a safe space might have things like, okay, let's just agree to disagree. So we're not even going to talk about it. Let's just agree to disagree. Or, oh, you're sensitive. Don't take it personally. Let's just assume positive intent, that I'm not trying to say anything negative or harmful. Ultimately, it's about keeping some comfort. And usually who is it keeping comfort is typically are more white folks like myself who are in positions of power or are in, where we have less diversity present. So again, safe spaces kind of emphasizes that individualism. Whereas a brave space, spaces we want to create with our families, with our children, with our community members, with our educational staff, a brave space is going to allow us to engage in conversations about social issues with honesty as well as with sensitivity. So a brave space is inclusive of all voices. It engages with critical dialogue. It may not always feel safe in the way of feeling comfortable. It's good if there's a level of discomfort, because that's kind of exploring then our edges of our epistemology and our knowledge systems and beliefs, and perhaps bringing in different perspectives, different people's lived experiences and truths. So a brave space really allows us to connect to that shared humanity, and is also a space in which reconciliation and healing is possible. So trauma-informed care is a big part of that, as you saw in our framework, culturally relevant pedagogy and trauma-informed care. And thinking about what we talked about with the peace actions and creating brave spaces, we have to be aware that there's a lot of trauma. There are a lot of different types of trauma. And in any space that we are in, there are people who have been impacted by trauma, whether it's adverse childhood experiences. In education, there's a lot of like toxic chronic stress, might even have be exposed to trauma and then kind of vicariously taking that on. Trauma, there's so many different types: PTSD, historical trauma, generational trauma. So we can be aware that there is a prevalence of trauma in any space that we are in. And so to be empathetically aware about how those traumatic experiences, whether you know them or you don't, doesn't matter, but we know that that is most likely impacting a person's sense of self, their behavior, their relationships, just how they're interacting with the world. And trauma is stored in the nonverbal part of the brain. So it can be challenging to identify, it can be challenging to talk about, especially for children. And we don't need to know the exact events or the precise prevalence of trauma to know that this is within our work, in our communities, in our schools, in our educational spaces, in our businesses, that the prevalence is so high. And collectively, the impacts of past trauma and how we vicariously carry that through, we must implement trauma-informed and trauma-responsive approaches. I like to think about this spectrum as like awareness, getting those foundations, and then responsiveness. How do I respond to somebody in trauma? How do I prevent triggers, or how do I respond generally to needs in the community? And those things move into trauma-informed. So I see a lot of spaces folks might say like, oh yeah, we're trauma informed. It's like, oh, you didn't do that over a 2-hour workshop, that's for sure. That is a multi-year process of becoming trauma informed, where it is embedded into our systems, our policies, our procedures, the way that we respond to each other. So our book really goes into those trauma aware and responsive pieces, and then starts that process of becoming truly trauma informed. And what does that mean? And one of the main principles is that, connected to the peace action, seek peace within yourself and others. And this is the neurosequential brain. And the neurosequential brain is that essentially the brain develops from the bottom up. So our brainstem sensory input comes in, we see, we hear, we smell. Brainstem is what is registering that information and kind of deciding, safe, am I unsafe? This part of our brain, the brainstem, the diencephalon, where our blood is pumping, our breathing is happening, our regulated temperature occurs. This area of the brain does not have language. So it's our survival, it's our mammalian brain, all about regulation. Then we move up to the brain. So that input first moves through that lower brain and then into the limbic system. And the limbic system is where most of our emotions and memories, things related to our relay and processing of the sensory input, that's happening in this midbrain area. So for example, the hippocampus can shrink from trauma, and that impacts memory and learning storage. All right, so why is this important? I'm trained in the neurosequential model of education, Dr. Bruce Perry's work. And what we know is because of regulation has to happen before we can relate. And then going even further than that into the cortex is where we have our reasoning, our abstract thought, cognition, critical thinking. So if we are not ensuring that adults are regulated so that they can support co-regulation of children, if we are not making sure that we are prioritizing above all else regulation as an entry point into relationship and learning, that if students are not regulated, they are not accessing the full capacity of their brain, of their academic reasoning brain. And so we have to have the body and the mind in a regulated and more calm state. A person feels supported, they're feeling a sense of psychological safety, and then they can do those things that we ask in academic load, problem solving, creative thinking, and so forth. So one strategy I will share with you, and I have some free lesson plans and resources on my website, this being one, and we really go into this in our book as well. But this is the pause, breathe, notice, act strategy, PBNA. So I'd like you to just get yourself comfortable in your spot, feet flat on the ground. If it feels good, you can wiggle around a little. Have your hands palm up on your lap. You can close your eyes, allow yourself to go deeper in that inner space. And just noticing for a moment. We've talked a lot about some heavy things, some empowering things, just kind of noticing as we pause here, how you're feeling. And let's take a deep breath in through the nose, exhaling out through the mouth. Sigh it out. There's a lot to consider. On your next breath, inhale through the nose again. And let's exhale out like you're exhaling out through a little straw breath. Your goal is to exhale out of that straw as slowly as you can. And just repeat that a few times in your own. Breathing in, breathing out through that little straw. As you're breathing out through that little straw, and the next exhale, just let your breath be normal. Don't try to control it. This is where we can notice our experience, become that observer within. Notice any thoughts, emotions, and just let them be. Give yourself a little smile, a little thank you to yourself for taking a moment to nourish your well being, to regulate. You can blink open your eyes when you're ready. So, this pause, breathe, notice act, it's one I work with all ages and stages. When you're introducing it, pause and breathe is a great place to just start. And then we can go deeper into noticing. But I have a lot of resources for free available on my website, including the lesson plan for the PVNA, printables, Google Slides, same for peace circles, as well as another peacemaker, which is really introducing more of those democratic classroom pieces. In this seed space, there's also videos for adults that guide you through thinking more deeply about your feelings of the peace actions and kind of how those intersect with your life. So there are just, again, so many ways that we can bring peace education into our classrooms, into our spaces, into our lives. And those 5 peace actions are such a powerful way to do that. I'd love to keep in touch. I have a newsletter that I send out monthly with different writing and resources that you're welcome to sign up for. Certainly love for you to have a copy of the book if that's of interest, but lots of free resources on the website, and certainly reach out to me if you'd like to stay connected. And thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. And I can take any questions as well. I'm going to just pause the recording here as we do that.